Hello, this is Jim Whitehead of All Power Group. Thank you for being here. This is a little detour from my typical generator presentations, but I needed to build a much faster computer to process this content. So this really is what we would describe as my computer build. The biggest thing that I do with computers, I build them to the highest level I'm capable of, and I also put extra money and time into cooling the internal component. As you would expect, that anything that runs and electrons go through, they create a lot of heat. So basically, what I did, and I'm going to describe the whole computer, and then you'll see a little presentation of one portion of video that I took of when I was putting it together. But we started out with an Antec full tower case, an Asus motherboard, on the AMD5 platform, which is relatively new and definitely has some growing pains. I used an AMD 9 7950X, which is pretty much the fastest chip that's available at this point in time. I included a 1300 watt power supply. And especially from the old days, we had these small power supplies that you paid $1.98 for, and they weren't really very good power supplies. But today we build them with power supplies that are either gold rated or platinum rated with a 10-year warranty. The point being that you don't want a power supply to fail prematurely or have it where it's not supplying enough power. The one thing is a little aside that I need to mention. When it comes to the cables that you use that comes with the power supply, they're very specific to that power supply. Even within same manufacturers, I bought an EVGA 1300. Even if, let's say, I said, gee, I need another 8-pin cable, and my last build was the same brand. So I'm thinking, well, I can just get another 8-pin cable from that other power supply. Biggest warning, don't do it. Because even though an 8-pin looks the same, it's usually not. So if you use an 8-pin or a 12-pin or a 4-pin, 6-pin, that's from another power supply, it might unfortunately do some damage to the machine. So that's something very important. Now, the 7950X is known for, along with the Intel 13 series, they run very hot. The AMD, they very readily say that it can run at 95 degrees centigrade all day long. I don't like that temperature, just makes me very uncomfortable. And also in some cases, if it goes a little bit above that, it will, and this is the good point, is it will throttle the CPU down. In other words, slow the CPU down. But that doesn't make sense. And, we've had issues lately, unfortunately, that CPUs have basically gone out of control and shot up to 200 degrees centigrade and basically popped that chip, and also it destroyed the motherboard. And that was somewhat related to BIOS issues. And again, what I said earlier about AMD 5, new platform for AMD, it has some growing pain. I did everything I could to avoid that. Now, for cooling, and the expectation in this big case is I was going to use a 420 millimeter radiator AIO. In other words, it has a radiator. In this case, it has 3 140 millimeter fans, and it circulates coolant through the radiator. Fans cool the water down, and then it goes back, in this case, to the CPU, and on and on. It's what they call a closed loop. Now, I've never used a 420. Typically, the biggest I've used was a 360. But here's what happened. And this is when you're building a machine that you're using high-end parts, biggest you can get your hands on, you might run into some issues. Now, the Antec full tower case was advertised as being able to take a 420 millimeter radiator and also a 360. Now, I did buy a 360 for the GPU graphics card. So in other words, I wanted it liquid cooled with an AIO, both the graphics card and the 7950X. Now what happened, and one of the biggest rules with AIOs, you have to have the cooling flow come from the top of the radiator and go down to whatever you're cooling. And I emphasized earlier that what we look for is best cooling you can potentially put on a machine. So what we have in the front, and I've never used one this size, it's a 420 millimeter radiator for basically a cooler that will go to the hook on, connect to the AMD 7950X processor CPU. What we're finding that what you're looking at now, that's the radiator for video card. And right now, because this 420 is so big, you basically have to take one of the fans off on this, slip it in because of the wiring, the hoses that carry the coolant fluid. And basically, other cooler here, or radiator here, and yes, we wouldn't want to run that with one less fan. So what we're going to end up doing, this is kind of going to be what we call a Frankenstein build, but it will be a cooling. We need to put fans that pull air through on the top of the machine. And we have to raise this top portion, which is going to look real weird. I get it. But what happens with talking now about the radiator for the 4090 GPU, yes, we have two fans and this is going to go in the up position. This is up, that's down. That pulls air through the radiator, and then what's going to happen is we're going to have these three fans pulling air up, because again, you can mess that up by putting the fan the wrong way. We're going to have three fans on top that are going to basically pull everything up, and so you're going to have what we call a push-pull. That's going to be pushing through the radiator right here, and then these are going to be pulling air up through and out the top of the radiator. So we'll be going from, instead of having three fans on this, we're going to have two and then three, literally 140 millimeter fans. So the cooling is going to be unbelievable, but I admit it's not my exact plan that I thought I was going to get into. But anyway, we'll keep you updated. We're going to keep going on this. It's funny, when you build a new computer and you go state of the art, biggest cooling, this is what we call a full tower case. They have mid-tower, they have mini, and they have all different size cases. And the expectation was that this would be plenty of room for both the 420 and the 360, but it's really not, but I'm going to make it work. So I'll keep you updated. And when I put the 420 in the front, basically fit just, but it had it. So I had two radiators now that I'm using. You'll see where I had to make a decision that I could not put that 360 for the GPU radiator on top with all three fans. So the only choice I had was to take one of the fans off, the fan closest to the top of the 420 millimeter radiator, and very readily I knew that that would not adequate cooling for the graphics card. So I got into, and you'll see a picture of it, I got into where I did a Frankenstein build. I had now that 360 that only had two fans on it. I ended up putting an additional three fans on top of the case, which is kind of unusual. The case is black, the fans are black, three additional 140 millimeter fans. So cooling wise, we're in good shape. Would I sell this machine to somebody? They would say, wow, this looks kind of weird. I don't know if I really would want this. So what we have is, and this is one of the best cooling situations, is what we call a push-pull. So the air is being pulled up through that 360, but also being pulled up through that same radiator. So you have what we call a classic push-pull, and it really keeps the unit very, very cool. And I'm able to keep the unit within 44 up to 60 degrees, depending on what I'm processing, way below that 95 threshold that I don't want to ever be close to. I used, and this was another thing with this new AMD 5 series, I used two 32 gigabyte Corsair RAM chips. There's 4 slots. Basic point was being said that and as time goes on, when they do additional BIOSes and they improve the motherboard, yada, 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 basically it probably would be all right in the long run. But I only used 2 chips, got up to 60 gigabytes, and I put them in A2 and a B2, and they luckily, I had no problem with boot up or any issues where they were having a problem with those RAM sticks. A lot of times when you're building a computer, you go to the motherboard manufacturer and it will tell you basically what memory you can use, the specific brands and part numbers. That doesn't always guarantee that you're going to be in good shape. You really don't know until you go to push the button and say, oh, I hope this machine is going to post. So it did. And, I'm happy with that. And you'll see going through the whole how I put the two different radiators together. At the end, I basically show where you see cooler on the CPU, and you'll see where there's some diagrams in the presentation that give you, this is the way you do it, in the sense of putting the cooler on the computer chip, and this is where the other one with the X means don't do it that way. And it makes so much of a difference if you literally are only off by a couple millimeters, because what will happen is the cooler could very well not be covering all of the CPU. So you will end up having a hotspot, and definitely you will basically find it will shorten the life of the computer chip. But each day we try to make them a little bit better. So I want to thank you very, very much for being here. And again, this is Jim Whitehead, and take care of All Power Group.